My boss's son called me obsolete and fired me to modernize the company, but he forgot to check the contracts. Now he owes me $780,000, and I'm taking his biggest clients with me as his empire collapses. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. My career died in the time it takes to close a laptop lid. I stood in the office I had occupied for 13 years, watching a 26-year-old in a $3,000 suit erase my life with a smirk. Connor Mitchell didn't look at me as he spoke. He was too busy admiring his own reflection in the glass of his high-end smartwatch. "We don't need people like you anymore, Aubrey," he said. His voice was thin and reeked of the Ivy League entitlement he wore like armor. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just watched his thumb hover over the intercom, waiting to call security to escort me out of the building I had helped build from a $2 million struggle into a $15 million powerhouse. I nodded once, my jaw tight enough to crack bone, and walked toward the door. The hallway felt miles long. Every face I passed was a person I had hired, a person whose kid's name I knew, a person who was now looking at the floor to avoid seeing the ghost of their chief operating officer. I reached my car and sat in the silence of the parking lot, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. I wasn't thinking about the betrayal yet. I was thinking about the number. $780,000. That was the price of Connor's arrogance. He hadn't checked the files. He hadn't looked at the legacy contracts his father, Sean, had drawn up 6 years ago when a competitor tried to poach me. I had a golden parachute clause. 3 times my annual salary for termination without cause. I pulled my phone from my purse and tapped a name I hadn't called in months. Patricia Vance answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, professional, and exactly what I needed. "Aubrey, I heard you were having a meeting with the heir apparent today," she said. I put the car in gear and looked back at the Mitchell Industrial sign one last time. "He just triggered the clause, Patricia. Every cent of it." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of a pen clicking. "You're sure? No documentation? No performance plan?" I laughed, a cold sound that surprised even me. He told me I was obsolete. He did it in front of his new consultants. I drove home through the streets of Columbus, watching the familiar landmarks blur past. I was 54 years old. I had rebuilt my life once before, after my husband, James, died in a wreck 16 years ago. I had raised 2 daughters alone on the salary Mitchell Industrial gave me. I had poured my grief into production schedules and quality control gates. Now that life was a cardboard box in my back seat. I pulled into my driveway and saw my neighbor, Mrs. Chin, pruning her roses. The world was still turning, but my axis had shifted. I walked into my kitchen and set my keys on the granite counter. The house was too quiet. It always was since the girls moved out. But today the silence felt heavy, like a physical weight. I made a pot of coffee, my movements mechanical. I needed to move. I needed to act. If I sat still, the anger would swallow me whole. I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal email. There it was, an internal memo sent to the entire company just 10 minutes after I left the building. Subject: Organizational restructuring. The text was a masterpiece of corporate backstabbing. It spoke of the need for fresh perspectives and the retirement of the old guard. It mentioned me by name, thanking me for my years of service while implying I was the anchor dragging the ship down. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just firing me. He was trying to bury my reputation before I could even get home. I printed the memo, the paper warm in my hand. One piece of evidence. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Rachel, our engineering director. "Aubrey, please tell me this is a joke. Marcus and Denise just got the same talk." I stared at the screen. He hadn't just fired me. He had decapitated the entire leadership team. Marcus had been there 12 years, Denise 10. Combined, we held every ounce of institutional knowledge the company possessed. Connor was clearing the deck for his Wharton buddies. He was burning the house down to prove he owned the matches. I dialed Sean Mitchell's private line. He was the man who had hired me when I was a grieving widow with nothing but a resume and a desperate need to work. He was the man who had become my mentor, my partner in building a legacy. He had stepped down 5 weeks ago, handing the keys to his son because he wanted to believe the boy was ready. I waited through 4 rings, my heart hammering against my ribs. Aubrey? Sean's voice was thick with sleep. He was at his vacation home in Florida, trying to enjoy a retirement he hadn't earned yet. Sean, have you seen the memos? I asked. My voice was steady, but the edge was there. What memos? I'm on the golf course, Aubrey. What's going on? I took a breath, looking at the $780,000 figure I had scribbled on a notepad. Your son just fired me, Rachel, Marcus, and Denise. Without cause, without warning. Sean went silent. The background noise of the golf course seemed to vanish. He did what? I heard him breathing, a ragged, uneven sound. He didn't look at the contracts, Sean. He didn't see the clauses you put in 6 years ago. He just handed out $2.5 million in severance penalties in a single afternoon. And he did it on the basis of age, Sean. He told us we were too old to innovate. Sean let out a sound that was half groan, half growl. I'll call you back, he said. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair, the steam from my coffee rising in the afternoon light. The war had started. I spent the next hour calling Marcus and Denise. We were a unit. We had always been a unit. Marcus was furious, his voice booming through the speakers. I started on the floor. Aubrey. I worked my way up from the lathes. That kid doesn't know the difference between a hydraulic press and a toaster. Denise was quieter, her voice trembling with the shock of it. I have a mortgage, Aubrey. I have a mother in assisted living. What are we going to do? I looked at the memo on my desk. We're going to wait, I told them. We're going to let the checks clear. And then we're going to show them what happens when you throw away the people who keep the lights on. By 5 o'clock, the sun was dipping below the tree line. I was onto my 3rd cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It wasn't Sean. It was a courier. I opened the door and signed for a thick envelope. Inside was a formal termination notice, signed by Connor Mitchell. It was cold, clinical, and legally disastrous for him. It cited no cause. It offered no transition period. It was a declaration of war. I leaned against the doorframe, the paper fluttering in my hand. I looked across the street and saw the lights coming on in the neighborhood houses. Normal lives. I wasn't a normal person anymore. I was a liability. I was a woman with 16 years of secrets and a bank account about to be filled with the Mitchell Industrial's liquid reserves. I went back to my laptop and began a new document. I didn't write about feelings. I wrote about facts. I wrote about the Crawford Automotive contract renewal coming up in 6 weeks. I wrote about the supplier in Detroit who only took my calls. I wrote about the clicking sound in machine number 3 that only Marcus knew how to fix. My phone rang again. It was Sean. This time, he wasn't calm. I can hear him screaming at Connor in the background, Aubrey. I'm at the airport. I'm coming back. Please tell me you haven't spoken to a lawyer yet. I looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. I thought about the way Connor had looked at me, like I was a piece of gum on his shoe. I thought about Rachel's tears and Denise's mortgage. It's too late for that, Sean. I said. Patricia is already drafting the suit. The silence on the other end was absolute. The morning sun hit my kitchen table like a spotlight, illuminating the mountain of paperwork I had spent the night organizing. I hadn't slept. You don't sleep when your world is on fire. You just watch the flames and figure out how to salvage the copper from the walls. At exactly 8 a.m., my phone buzzed with a bank notification. $780,000. The full amount of the golden parachute had been wired. Connor's consultants must have finally realized the mess they were in and tried to pay me off to keep me quiet. They didn't realize that for me, this wasn't about the money. It was about the 16 years of my life they had tried to dismiss as a line item on a spreadsheet. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and looked at the text message that followed the wire. It was from an unknown number, but the tone was unmistakable. The wire has been sent. Consider this the end of our professional relationship. Do not contact company employees. Any attempt to disparage Mitchell Industrial will result in legal action. Regards, C. Mitchell. I smiled at the screen. He was still trying to bully me. He didn't understand that a non-disparagement clause only works if the person you're trying to silence hasn't already been handed a fortune and a reason to burn you down. I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice sounding like he'd been gargling gravel. "Did yours hit?" he asked. I looked at the confirmation screen. "Every cent, Marcus." "Yours?" "Yeah," he grunted. $510,000. My wife thinks we should move to Florida. What about you? I stood up and walked to the window. I'm not moving, Marcus. I'm going to the office. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Aubrey, they'll have security. You're persona non grata. I grabbed my blazer from the back of the chair. I'm not going inside, Marcus. I'm going to the parking lot. Sean is landing in an hour. I drove back to Mitchell Industrial, the familiar route feeling strange and hostile. When I pulled into the lot, I didn't park in my old spot. I parked near the entrance, where the employees would see me. I saw Tim, one of our floor supervisors, smoking a cigarette near the loading dock. He saw me and froze, his eyes wide. He looked like he wanted to wave, but he turned his head and went back inside. The fear was already setting in. Connor was ruling by intimidation, and the people I cared about were caught in the crossfire. A black sedan pulled up 10 minutes later. Sean Mitchell stepped out, looking like he had aged a decade since he left for Florida. He saw me and stopped, his shoulders sagging. "Aubrey?" he said, walking over. His voice was hollow. "I told you I'd fix it." I looked at the building, the glass reflecting the morning light. "You can't fix a broken trust with a wire transfer, Sean. Your son didn't just fire me. He insulted everything we built. He told the whole company we were the problem." Sean rubbed his face with his hands. "I know. I saw the memo. I've been on the phone with the board for 4 hours. Connor came out of the front doors then, flanked by 2 men in identical charcoal suits. He looked at his father, then at me, his expression turning to stone. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. His voice was high and tight, the sound of a man who knew he was out of his depth. "She's here because I asked her to be," Sean snapped. His voice had the old authority back, the steel that had built the company. "Get inside, Connor. We're having a meeting, now." Connor didn't move. He looked at me, a flicker of something, fear, maybe, crossing his eyes. "She's fired, Dad. She doesn't have access." I stepped forward, the severance confirmation still open on my phone. "I have all the access I need, Connor. You just paid for it, 3 times over." I looked at the 2 consultants behind him. "I hope you guys are good at production management, because you just lost the only 3 people who know how to keep the assembly lines from seizing up. The Crawford contract is up for renewal in 6 weeks. Good luck explaining the quality drops to Michael Brennan. Connor's face went pale at the mention of Brennan. He's the most demanding client we have. He's the one who keeps the company liquid. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving Sean and his son standing on the pavement. I had a lunch meeting with Bernard Whitmore, the CEO of Apex Automation. He was Mitchell's biggest competitor, and he had been trying to hire me for years. I had stayed out of loyalty to Sean. That loyalty was now a pile of ash. I drove to a quiet bistro on the edge of town, my mind racing. I wasn't just looking for a job. I was looking for a home for my team. Bernard was already at the table, a glass of iced tea in front of him. He was a shark, but a respectful one. He didn't waste time with small talk. I saw the news, Aubrey. I couldn't believe it. Sean actually let that kid cut your throat? I sat down, the weight of the day finally starting to settle on my shoulders. Sean didn't have a choice. Connor took the board. Bernard leaned forward, his eyes sharp. My offer still stands, more than stands. I want you as COO, and I heard Marcus and Rachel are on the market too. I took a breath. Not just them, Bernard. Denise too. We're a package deal. Bernard smiled, a slow, predatory look. That's a lot of salary, Aubrey, but it's also a lot of intelligence. If I take the four of you, Mitchell Industrial is a hollow shell within 6 months. I looked at my hands, the wedding ring I still wore catching the light. I don't want to destroy them, Bernard. I just want to work. Bernard chuckled, a dry sound. In this business, those are the same thing. You know the clients. You know the suppliers. If you come to Apex, the business follows you. It's not revenge. It's just the market correcting a mistake. I left the restaurant with a draft contract in my purse. It was everything I wanted. Equity, a seat on the board, and a team of my own choosing. But as I sat in my car, I felt a wave of nausea. I was about to go to war with my friends. I was about to take the Crawford account, the one I had nurtured for a decade, and hand it to a competitor. I thought about Sean's face in the parking lot. I thought about the way he had looked at the building. He was a builder, like me, and I was about to become a wrecking ball. My phone rang. It was Denise. She was crying. Aubrey, they just sent security to my house to collect my company laptop. They wouldn't even let me go inside to get my personal files. They treated me like a criminal. The nausea vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The guilt I had felt for Sean evaporated. He had let this happen. He had let his son treat his best people like thieves. Denise, listen to me, I said. Stop crying. Pour yourself a glass of wine and wait for an email from me. We're not going to be unemployed for long. I drove home and opened my laptop. I didn't look at the technical files. I looked at my contact list. Michael Brennan at Crawford. Sarah at the Detroit plant. Every person who had ever thanked me for going the extra mile. I didn't send an email yet. I just looked at the names. They were the real assets of Mitchell Industrial, and Connor didn't even have their phone numbers. I looked at the clock. 9 p.m. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled down a photo of James. I did it, James, I whispered. I got the team out. But the hard part is just beginning. The following Monday felt like waking up in a different country. For 16 years, my Monday started with a 6 a.m. production briefing at Mitchell Industrial. Now, I was sitting on my back porch in my pajamas, watching a cardinal peck at the bird feeder. The silence was deafening. My phone was a brick of notifications I didn't want to touch. Former colleagues, suppliers, even a few clients had heard the rumors. The industry was small, and a mass exodus of senior leadership was the kind of blood in the water that brought the sharks out to play. I finally picked up the phone when Patricia Vance's name appeared. Aubrey, "We have a problem," she said. No preamble, just the edge in her voice that meant business. "The Mitchell board is filing for an injunction. They're claiming you breached your non-compete by meeting with Bernard Whitmore on Friday." I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. "I didn't sign anything, Patricia. We just had lunch." "Doesn't matter," she snapped. "Connor is claiming you shared proprietary production data. He's trying to freeze your severance and block you from working for Apex for 2 years. I stood up, the cardinal fluttering away at my sudden movement. He's lying. I don't even have the files anymore. I returned everything. That's not the point, Aubrey. The point is to tie you up in court until you're irrelevant. He wants to starve you out. I looked at the $780,000 in my account. He can't starve me, Patricia. He's trying to humiliate me. What's the next move? We move faster, she said. I'm filing a countersuit for age discrimination and defamation, and I need those memos you printed, every one of them. I spent the morning at Patricia's office, a glass-walled fortress in the heart of downtown Columbus. We sat across from each other, a mountain of evidence between us. Patricia went through the memos with a highlighter, her eyes narrowing. This line here, about legacy dead weight, that's gold, Aubrey. And this one about modernizing the workforce. It's a textbook case, but we need more. We need witnesses. I thought about Tim on the loading dock. I thought about the office staff who had looked away when I walked out. They're all scared, Patricia. Connor told them if they talk to me, they're next. Patricia leaned back, her chair creaking. Then we don't ask them to talk. We ask them to watch. Because in 3 weeks, Mitchell Industrial is going to start failing. And when the ship starts sinking, the rats don't just leave. They start looking for a lifeboat. I left her office feeling like I was carrying a heavy weight. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a strategist in a war I never wanted. I drove to a park near the river, needing to clear my head. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves turning shades of fire and gold. My phone rang. It was an internal line from Mitchell Industrial. I hesitated, then answered. Aubrey? It was Denise. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the background noise. I'm calling from a burner phone. You were right. The floor is in chaos. Connor tried to speed up the line for the Crawford order, and one of the robotic arms seized. We're already 2 days behind. I felt a pang of professional pain. That arm needs a specific calibration every 48 hours, Denise. Marcus is the only one who knows the software override. I know, she whispered. Connor's consultants are trying to fix it with a YouTube tutorial. It's a disaster. And Sean is just sitting in his office with the door locked. He looks like a ghost, Aubrey. He won't talk to anyone. My chest tightened. Sean was watching his life's work crumble because he couldn't stand up to his own blood. I'm sorry, Denise. I really am. But I can't help him. I'm under an injunction. Denise let out a shaky breath. Just be ready. People are starting to quit. 2 of my best lab techs walked out this morning. I hung up and stared at the river. The lifeboat Patricia mentioned was already being built. I called Bernard Whitmore. Bernard, we need to move the start date for the team. The injunction is a smokescreen. Connor is losing the floor. Bernard's voice was calm, almost bored. I heard. The industry grapevine is screaming. I've already got the contracts ready for Marcus, Rachel, and Denise. We'll cover their legal fees. But I need one thing from you, Aubrey. I need the Crawford account. If you bring Brennan to Apex, you're not just COO. You're a partner. The word partner carried a weight I wasn't ready for. It meant I was no longer an employee. I was an owner. It meant my success was tied to the destruction of my old home. I'll talk to Michael Brennan, I said, but I won't lie to him. I won't sabotage Sean. Bernard laughed. You don't have to sabotage anything, Aubrey. Connor is doing that for you. Just show Brennan the alternative. Show him that at Apex, the people who build the machines are the ones who run the company. I spent the rest of the day in my home office, drafting a proposal for Crawford Automotive. It was the best work I had ever done. It wasn't about price. It was about reliability. It was about the fact that I knew their assembly lines better than they did. I knew that if they stayed with Mitchell, their production would stall by Christmas. I hit send on an email to Michael Brennan at 11 p.m. The subject line was simple: a change in direction. My hand shook as I clicked the mouse. I felt like I was pulling a trigger. I went to bed, but sleep was a stranger. I kept seeing the faces of the people on the floor. I saw Sean's face when he realized his son had lied to him. I saw the empty office I had left behind. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael Brennan. I've been waiting for this email, Aubrey. Can you meet tomorrow at the usual spot? 8 a.m. Don't be late. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in the darkness. The first domino had fallen. The usual spot was a nondescript diner, halfway between Columbus and the Crawford plant. It was where Michael and I had hammered out the details of the original contract 6 years ago over burnt coffee and greasy hash browns. I arrived 10 minutes early, my portfolio tucked under my arm. Michael was already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking at a stack of production reports that didn't seem to be making him happy. He looked up as I slid into the booth, his expression unreadable. "Aubrey," he said, "you look like you've been through a war." "I am in a war, Michael," I said, signaling the waitress for coffee. "I think you know why I'm here." Michael tapped the reports on the table. "These just came in from Mitchell Industrial. They're claiming the delay on our hydraulic components is due to a systemic software upgrade. But my guys on the floor say the line is down because a robotic arm is smashed. Which is it?" I didn't hesitate. "It's the arm, Michael. They tried to override the safety protocols to make up for lost time. They don't have anyone left who knows how to fix the calibration." Michael leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "I've been with Mitchell for 8 years because of you, Aubrey. Not Sean, and certainly not that kid of his. You're the one who kept my lines running. But Apex? They're expensive. Their lead times are longer. Why should I move?" I opened my portfolio and slid the Apex proposal across the table. "Because at Apex, I'm not just the COO. I'm a partner. And I'm bringing Marcus and Rachel with me. We're building a dedicated line for Crawford. Guaranteed 0 downtime or we pay the penalty." Michael scanned the proposal, his fingers tracing the figures. "This is a bold move, Aubrey. Sean will see this as a betrayal." I looked him dead in the eye. Sean let his son fire the 4 people who made that company work. He let his son lie to his biggest client. The betrayal didn't start with me, Michael. It started when Connor Mitchell decided that experience was a liability. Michael was silent for a long minute, the only sound the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "If I sign this, I need your word that the quality doesn't dip. Not by a fraction of a percent." "You have my word," I said, "and you have Marcus. He's already designing the new quality control gates for your specific tolerances." Michael nodded slowly. He took a pen from his pocket and signed the letter of intent. "Get the formal contract to my legal team by Friday. And Aubrey, be careful. Connor Mitchell is the kind of man who would rather lose a company than lose face." I watched him walk out of the diner, the signed paper feeling like $1 million weight in my hand. I had done it. I had taken the foundation out from under Mitchell Industrial. I drove to Apex headquarters, a modern glass and steel building that felt cold compared to the rustic charm of Mitchell's old brick factory. Bernard was waiting for me in the lobby. He saw the folder in my hand and grinned. "Brennan signed?" "He signed," I said, but I wasn't smiling. "We need to get Marcus and the others in here today. We have 6 weeks to build a production line from scratch. Bernard clapped me on the shoulder. The equipment is already arriving. I've cleared the east wing. It's yours, Aubrey. All of it. The next few days were a blur of activity. Marcus, Rachel, and Denise arrived like refugees, their eyes bright with a mix of fear and excitement. We spent 18 hours a day on the floor, surrounded by crates of machinery and rolls of technical drawings. It felt like the early days, back when Sean and I were first building our legacy. But there was a shadow over us. We all knew that every step we took was a nail in the coffin of our former lives. We worked in a fever, fueled by caffeine and the need to prove we weren't obsolete. On Thursday afternoon, the shadow darkened. I was on the floor, helping Marcus level a CNC machine when my phone rang. It was Patricia Vance. "Aubrey, the injunction was granted," she said. Her voice was flat. "You have to stop work immediately. Connor filed a second suit claiming you stole the blueprints for the Crawford line." I felt a surge of cold fury. Those weren't blueprints, Patricia. Those were my notes. My own personal engineering notes from 10 years ago. "Doesn't matter," she said. "The judge is playing it safe. You're barred from the Apex floor until a hearing next week." I looked at Marcus, who was watching me with a wrench in his hand. I looked at the half-assembled line. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "He's stopping us," I whispered. "He's going to win by default because we can't meet the deadline." I walked off the floor, my heels clicking on the concrete, and didn't stop until I was in my car. I didn't go home. I drove to the Mitchell Industrial Headquarters. I didn't care about the security or the glares. I walked through the front doors like I owned the place, because for 16 years, I effectively had. I pushed past the receptionist and walked straight into Sean's office. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a photo of his late wife. He looked up, his eyes widening. "Aubrey, you can't be here. The lawyers." I slammed the injunction papers on his desk. "Tell him to stop, Sean. Tell your son to stop this madness. He's lying to the court, he's lying to the clients, and he's destroying your name." Sean looked at the papers, his hands shaking. "I can't control him, Aubrey. He has the board. He says you're trying to steal the company." I leaned over the desk, my face inches from his. "I don't want the company, Sean. I wanted my job. I wanted the respect I earned. Your son fired me for being old, and now he's suing me for being smart. If you don't stop him, I'm going to go to the press. I'm going to show them every memo, every email, every lie. I'll burn this place to the ground before I let him take my career." Sean didn't look away. He looked at me with a profound sadness. "I know," he whispered. "I've already lost it, haven't I? The company, the legacy, it's all gone." The door burst open then. Connor stood there, his face flushed with rage. "Get out!" he screamed. "You're trespassing. I'm calling the police." I turned to him, my voice dropping to a whisper that was deadlier than a scream. "Call them, Connor. Call everyone. Because the police are going to want to know why you're using fraudulent data to obtain a court injunction." I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew I was bluffing, but he didn't know how much I knew. I walked past him, my shoulder brushing his, and didn't look back. I had 7 days to save my life. The hearing was set for Tuesday morning, a gray, rainy day that matched the mood in Patricia Vance's office. We were surrounded by binders of evidence, but the atmosphere was grim. Connor had hired a powerhouse firm from Chicago, and they were playing dirty. They had statements from 2 former employees claiming they saw me downloading files on my last day. It was perjury, plain and simple, but in a courtroom, a lie told twice can look like the truth. Patricia was pacing, her heels clicking like a countdown. "We need a leverage point, Aubrey. Something they don't expect." I looked at the burner phone Denise had given me. I hadn't heard from her in 48 hours. She was still inside, acting as our eyes and ears, but the risk was growing. If Connor found out, she'd be ruined. I checked the screen. One new message. It was a photo of a document. I enlarged it, my heart skipping a beat. It was a purchase order for inferior grade steel, signed by Connor Mitchell. He was cutting costs on the Crawford order to offset the severance payments. He wasn't just failing on delivery. He was sabotaging the safety of the components. I showed the phone to Patricia. She looked at the photo, then at me, a slow predatory smile spreading across her face. "This is it," she whispered. "This isn't just a business dispute anymore. This is a public safety issue. If that steel fails in a hydraulic press, it's not just a delay. It's a body count. We don't wait for the hearing, Aubrey. We call an emergency meeting with the board." I felt a surge of adrenaline. The board members were old friends of Sean's. They had gone along with Connor because they wanted stability, but they weren't killers. We spent the night drafting the ultimatum. It was simple. Withdraw the injunction and the lawsuits, or we go to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration with the purchase orders. It was a nuclear option. It would mean the end of Mitchell Industrial, but it was the only way to save ourselves. At 8 a.m., Patricia sent the file to every member of the board. By 9 a.m., my phone was ringing off the hook. It was Sean. "Aubrey, what have you done?" "The board is in an uproar. They're talking about a forced buyout." I sat at my kitchen table, a glass of water in my hand. "I did what I had to do, Sean. Your son was going to put people's lives at risk to cover his own mistakes. I couldn't let that happen." Sean's voice was broken. "He's my son, Aubrey. My only son." I looked out the window at the rain. "I know, Sean. But he's not the man you wanted him to be, and you can't keep sacrificing everyone else to protect a ghost." The line went dead. I felt a pang of grief for the friendship we had lost, but it was buried under the weight of the coming storm. The board meeting was held at 2 p.m. in the Mitchell conference room. I was invited, not as an employee, but as a claimant. I walked into the room with Patricia by my side. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Connor was there, sitting at the far end of the table, his face a mask of pale fury. Sean sat next to him, looking like he had withered away. The chairman of the board, an old man named Arthur, who had known my husband, stood up. "Aubrey," he said, "we've seen the documents. We've verified the orders." Arthur looked at Connor, then back at me. "We have reached a decision. The board has voted to remove Connor Mitchell as CEO effective immediately. His father will resume the role as interim lead while we seek a buyer for the company." Connor let out a strangled sound, half laugh, half sob. "You can't do this. I'm the owner." Arthur's voice was cold. "You're a liability, Connor. You've exposed us to criminal negligence. You'll be lucky if we don't sue you ourselves for the damage you've done to the brand." I looked at Connor. He was staring at the table, his world collapsing around him. He had thought he was untouchable because of his name, and now his name was the very thing that was being stripped away. I felt no joy in it, only a profound sense of waste. Arthur turned to me. "Aubrey, we want to settle. We'll withdraw all suits. We'll pay your legal fees, and we'll offer you a seat on the transition board. We need your help to save the Crawford account." I looked at Patricia. She nodded almost imperceptibly. I stood up, my blazer crisp, my voice steady. "No," I said. "I won't join the transition board. I've already accepted a partnership at Apex, and the Crawford account is already gone." I looked at Sean, who was watching me with a look of pure heartbreak. "I'll help you with the technical transition, Sean. I'll make sure the people on the floor are taken care of, but I'm not coming back." The heart of this company was the trust we had. And that's something you can't buy back with a settlement. I walked out of the room, the silence following me like a shadow. I reached the parking lot and stood in the rain, letting the cold water hit my face. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The war was over. I had my reputation, I had my team, and I had my future. But as I got into my car, I saw Sean standing at his office window, looking down at me. He raised a hand, a small, weary gesture of goodbye. I didn't wave back. I just started the engine and drove toward Apex. I arrived at the Apex floor an hour later. Marcus and Rachel were there, waiting by the new line. They saw my face and knew. "Is it over?" Rachel asked, her voice hushed. "It's over," I said. "The injunction is gone. We start production at 5 a.m. Marcus let out a cheer that echoed through the warehouse. He grabbed a wrench and went back to work, his movements full of a new energy. I stood there, watching my team, the people who had stayed with me when everything fell apart. We had 6 weeks to meet the Crawford deadline. It was going to be the hardest 6 weeks of our lives. But for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I belonged. I was a builder again. The transition to Apex felt like stepping onto a moving train. We had a skeleton crew and a deadline that Michael Brennan had made clear was non-negotiable. I stood on the floor at 5 a.m., the air smelling of industrial grease and ozone, watching the first of our new CNC machines hum to life. Marcus was already under the chassis of the main assembly arm, his face streaked with oil. He looked up and gave me a thumbs up, but I could see the fatigue in his eyes. We were all running on adrenaline and the $780,000 severance that now felt like a war chest rather than a retirement fund. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with an alert from a local business journal. The headline was a jagged blade, Mitchell Industrial faces liquidation following leadership collapse. I leaned against a packing crate, my heart skipping. The board hadn't just removed Connor. They were gutting the place to save their own investments. I thought about Sarah in accounting and Tim on the floor. They weren't just names on a spreadsheet. They were the people who had helped me carry Mitchell Industrial for 16 years. I walked into Bernard's glass-walled office, the quiet a sharp contrast to the roar of the floor. "Bernard, we have to talk about the Mitchell layoffs," I said, setting my tablet on his desk. He didn't look up from his monitors. 40% of their workforce is on the street as of an hour ago, he replied flatly. "I know what you're going to ask, Aubrey. We can't take them all." I gripped the edge of the desk. "We don't need to take them all. We need 35 skilled operators for the second shift to meet the Crawford deadline." Bernard finally looked at me, his eyes calculating. "That would put our payroll 20% over budget for the quarter," he said. I didn't blink. It would also guarantee that Michael Brennan gets his order 3 days early. And it would mean we have the most loyal production team in the state. Bernard leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're not just building a line, are you? You're building a kingdom. Call them." I spent the next 3 hours on the phone, personally reaching out to the people Connor had tossed aside. The conversations were gut-wrenching. When I called Jennifer, Denise's former assistant, she broke down in tears. She told me she had spent the morning wondering how she would pay her mortgage. By 4 p.m., we had 30 former Mitchell employees signed and ready to start the next morning. It felt like justice, but a heavy kind that left my shoulders tight. Just as I was leaving the floor, I saw a familiar silver sedan pull into the Apex visitor lot. It was Sean. He didn't come inside. He just sat in the car, looking at the Apex logo on the building. I walked out into the cool evening air, my boots crunching on the gravel. I reached his window and he rolled it down, his face a map of regret. "I heard you're hiring my people," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I leaned against the doorframe. "I'm hiring the people your son didn't value, Sean." He nodded slowly, staring at the steering wheel. The board is selling the Detroit plant tomorrow, he said. They're selling it to a holding company that's going to strip the machinery for parts. I felt a physical pang in my chest. That plant was where we landed the first major contract. I know, I said. Sean reached into the passenger seat and handed me a leather-bound folder. These are the maintenance logs for the Detroit line from the last 6 years, he said. Connor tried to delete them to hide the deferred maintenance, but I had backups. You'll need them if you're going to bid on the Ford account next month. I took the folder, the weight of it feeling like a peace offering. Why are you giving me this? I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. Because I want something we built to survive, even if my name isn't on the door. And because I'm sorry, Aubrey. For everything. He didn't wait for a response. He put the car in reverse and drove away, leaving me standing in the dark with the secrets of our old life in my hands. I looked at the folder and then at the glowing lights of the Apex floor. I walked back inside and found Marcus staring at a quality control report. His face was pale. Aubrey, we have a problem with the sensor shipment for the Crawford line, he said, his voice tight. The supplier we used at Mitchell just called. Connor blocked our credit line with them before he was removed. They won't release the sensors without a 50% cash deposit up front. I looked at the report. How much? $180,000, Marcus said. And we need them by Friday or the line stops. The $180,000 ultimatum felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the east wing of the Apex warehouse. Bernard was out of the state at a conference, and our corporate controller was a man who lived by the rule of no. I stood in the quality control lab, the silence of the high-tech equipment mocking our sudden paralysis. Marcus was pacing, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. If those sensors don't ship by 6 p.m. tonight, we miss the Kentucky assembly window, he said, pointing at the ticking clock on the wall. I didn't call the bank. I didn't call Bernard. I opened my personal banking app and looked at the $780,000 sitting in my account. The money meant to be my safety net after 16 years of labor. It was the golden parachute Sean had fought to give me, the very thing Connor had triggered in his arrogance. I thought about the 35 families we had just hired. I thought about the Crawford contract that was the bedrock of our new lives. I dialed the supplier's CFO directly. This is Aubrey Caldwell, I said, my voice cold and focused. I'm wiring $180,000 from my personal account right now. You release those sensors to the courier in 10 minutes, or I'll spend the rest of the afternoon finding a new primary supplier for Apex's entire national network. There was a long pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. The wire hit 5 minutes later. The sensors were on a plane by sundown. Marcus watched me put my phone away, his expression one of pure shock. You just bet your retirement on this line, Aubrey, he whispered. I looked at the production floor where Rachel was directing the new shift. I didn't bet it on the line, Marcus. I bet it on us. Now get back to that assembly arm. We have 4 hours to prep for the installation. The energy on the floor shifted from panic to a grim, determined speed. By Thursday, the Crawford line was a symphony of precision. We had integrated Sean's Detroit maintenance logs into our software, giving us a predictive edge that Mitchell Industrial never had. Rachel had developed a new hydraulic seal that reduced heat friction by 15%, a technical breakthrough she had been sitting on for years, while Connor ignored her reports. We weren't just making parts. We were making the best parts in the country. At 2 p.m., a black town car pulled into the loading dock. Michael Brennan stepped out, flanked by 3 men in Crawford corporate jackets. He didn't go to the front office. He came straight to the floor. He walked the length of the line in silence, his gloved hand occasionally touching a polished steel component. He stopped at the final testing station where Denise was monitoring the tolerances. He looked at the digital readout. 0.002 millimeters variance. That's tighter than the contract requirement, Brennan said, looking at me. I stood with my arms crossed, the fatigue of the last 72 hours heavy in my bones. We don't build to the contract, Michael. We build to the machine. He nodded, a sharp, decisive movement. The first shipment of 4,000 units arrived in Kentucky this morning. My plant manager says they're the cleanest components he's seen in a decade. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a document. I'm authorizing the 3-year extension today, he said, and I'm adding the Ohio Assembly contract to the bundle. That's an additional $6.5 million in annual revenue, Aubrey. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was quickly followed by a strange hollowness. I had won, but the victory was built on the wreckage of Sean's life. As Brennan was leaving, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a link to a news story. Mitchell Industrial Solutions has officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Assets to be liquidated to pay outstanding severance and supplier debts. I walked to the edge of the observation platform, looking down at the thriving floor we had built. We had survived the fall, but the company that had raised me was dead. I was about to head to my office when I saw Connor Mitchell standing at the security gate. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a plain jacket and jeans, looking small and defeated against the backdrop of the massive Apex facility. The security guard was pointing toward the exit, but Connor wasn't moving. I felt a flicker of the old anger, but it was cold now, like ash. I walked down the stairs and toward the gate, the sound of the machines fading behind me. The air at the security gate felt 10 degrees colder as I approached Connor. He looked older, the Wharton polish stripped away by months of public failure and legal battles. He didn't look at me with the same smirk he'd worn when he fired me. Instead, he kept his eyes on his shoes, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. The security guard looked at me for direction, and I gave a small nod. I'll handle this, I said. You have a lot of nerve showing up here, Connor, I said, my voice like a slate floor. He looked up, and I saw a flicker of the apology he would eventually send months later. I didn't come to fight, Aubrey, he said, his voice cracking. I came because my father won't see me. He told me to come here and see what a real chief operating officer looks like. I looked at him, searching for the manipulation, but all I saw was a boy who had finally hit a wall he couldn't buy his way through. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet-lined box. My father wanted you to have this back, he said, handing it toward me. I opened it. It was the anniversary clock Sean had given me, the heart of Mitchell Industrial. I had left it on my desk the day I was fired. He said it belongs where the work is being done, Connor whispered. I closed the box, the brass cool against my palm. He turned to leave, but I stopped him with a word. Connor. He paused, his shoulders slumped. Your father didn't lose that company because of you, I said, the truth surprising even me. He lost it because he stopped being a builder and started being a protector. Don't let your next mistake be thinking you can't learn from this one. He didn't respond, just walked toward the parking lot, a ghost of the man he thought he was. The final 6 months of the year were a blur of growth. Apex didn't just meet the Crawford deadline, we shattered it. Our revenue tripled as more legacy Mitchell clients fled the bankruptcy proceedings for the stability we offered. I was no longer just the woman who got fired. I was the architect of the most successful turnaround in the regional industry. But every night, I still saw Sean's face in the dark. I finally visited him in early December. He was living in a small apartment near the river, far from the estate he'd lost in the restructuring. The room was filled with books and old production models, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. He looked up as I entered, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. I heard about the Ford contract, he said, gesturing for me to sit. You're doing things I only dreamed of, Aubrey. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. I'm sorry about the company, Sean, I said finally. He shook his head slowly. The company was just brick and mortar, he said. The people were the legacy, and they're safe with you. He looked at the anniversary clock I had brought with me, now sitting on his small coffee table. It looks good there, I said. As I walked out of his apartment, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the streets of Columbus in white. I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me since the day Connor had looked at his watch and told me I was obsolete. I had built something new, something better, and I had done it without losing the person James had loved. I got into my car and turned on the heater, my hand steady on the wheel. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. The new quality gates are 100% operational. We're ready for the 6 a.m. shift. I smiled, the blue light of the screen reflecting in the windshield. I wasn't thinking about the past anymore. I was thinking about the morning, about the sound of the machines, and about the legacy that was now entirely mine. The 1-year anniversary of my firing dawned bright and cold. I stood on the bridge overlooking the Apex production floor, the anniversary clock now ticking steadily on the shelf behind my desk in the new executive suite. Below me, 3 full shifts of workers, many of them survivors of the Mitchell collapse, moved with a synchronized grace that made the warehouse feel alive. Marcus was down there, laughing with a new apprentice as they calibrated a high-speed sorter. He looked up, saw me, and gave a sharp, proud salute. We had just closed the largest quarter in the history of the company. Bernard had officially named me managing partner, and my $180,000 emergency loan had been repaid with an equity stake that made the original golden parachute look like pocket change. But the real victory wasn't in the bank account. It was in the fact that not a single one of the people we had hired from Mitchell had missed a mortgage payment or a tuition check. I opened my laptop to find the LinkedIn message from Connor Mitchell that had been sitting in my inbox for weeks. I read his apology again, the words about taking genuine accountability and understanding the value of experience. I looked at my response, the simple wish for him to become the leader his father believed he could be. It was the final stitch in a wound that had stayed open for too long. I hit archive and closed the lid. My phone rang, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel a spike of adrenaline. It was Sophie, calling from Chicago. Mom, Emma, and I are coming down for the weekend, she said, her voice full of excitement. We want to see the new plant, and we want to take you out to dinner to celebrate. I smiled, looking out the window at the Columbus skyline. I'd like that, sweetheart. I'd like that a lot. I walked down to the floor for the shift change, the air vibrating with the hum of the machines. I passed Denise, who was reviewing a batch of precision seals for the Ford account. She looked at me and winked, her face full of the confidence of a woman who knew her kingdom was secure. We had built something that wouldn't just survive the year. We had built something that would outlast us all. As I reached the loading dock, I saw the team leads gathering for the daily briefing. They looked at me, waiting for the word. I thought about the 16 years I had given to a man who couldn't protect me, and the 1 year I had given to a team that wouldn't let me fall. I realized then that the golden parachute hadn't been the money. It had been the resilience to start again, and the wisdom to know that real power isn't in the contract. It's in the people who keep the machines running. Let's get to work, I said, the words echoing through the vast humming space. We have a legacy to build. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.